Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard, as always, joining you on this Thursday that we release our podcasts. Today is a lace-only affair. It is myself and a couple of lacers that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking to about, because I read an article on HR Magazine's website a week or so ago, and it was posted to me from one of the people I'm going to chat to and introduce in a second as something that is quite an interesting thing to debate and discuss. And the article talked about how to be successful in the first 90 days of working within a new HR function. We, of course, talk to lots of HR professionals at all different levels. And I thought to myself, well, it's quite interesting because we spend a lot of time talking to chief people officers or chief human resources officers, and particularly not just those that are already well established in role and are looking at a new project, whether it's a transformation project, something to do with technology, whatever. But we also talk to them when they are just entering into a new role and start to think about, okay, well, what's come before me and how do I elevate our function to the next level? So what I wanted to do today is just take a little bit of time with one of our founders, Aaron Alburey. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, Chris. Good to hear you again, see you again even.
Hear and see. We have the benefit of virtual streams links in these days. So yeah, good to see you too. And we've got the fabulous Debbie Mitchell back again, who is becoming a regular partner of mine on these podcasts and live streams. Debbie, you all right?
It's been literally minutes since my last one.
Yes, absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Now, guys, of course, I wanted to talk to you specifically. What we're going to do today is, rather than talk about in HR the first 90 days you should be thinking of, what we thought we'd do is talk specifically as a HR leader, so chief people officer, group HR director, chief human resources officer. So I wanted to get your thoughts, because you guys work with CPOs, CHROs, you've worked with those newly entering into roles, looking at what should my people strategy be, how we should define it, and what are the first things that I need to be thinking of. So I'm going to leave you to frame that in your mind, give you a few minutes to think about that. But before we do that, we need to do our fundamentally different question check-in. And I'm sorry to be a bit braggy here, but I'm going to Glastonbury this week at the time of release. And we were just talking before we hit the record button about favourite music genres. And I don't really have one, because I like most of them, apart from Beyonce and ABBA. Those are the only two artists or bands that I just cannot stand. I'm going to start with you, Debbie. If you could align yourself to only one genre that you have to listen to for the rest of your life, and you can listen to nothing else, what would it be?
I'm too old to really know what the genres are these days, but the kind of vibe I like is like if I could only listen to one band, I'd listen to Snow Patrol for a very long time. So whatever genre they fit into, I'm not really sure. That's kind of my vibe. So I love a bit of Snow Patrol, Bastille, bit of Coldplay, that kind of stuff. Very middle of the road, probably. Is that the genre? Middle of the road?
Yeah, that's fine. Debbie wants to be marooned on an island with the guys from Snow Patrol.
Yes, please. If they're listening, yes.
Yeah, just if they're listening. Call me. Aaron, what would you go for?
This is a great question. I do love it. You ask my family, they would tell you that it's rock and things like Royal Blood, that kind of get up and get going kind of music. However, I think if I had to choose one for all time, I'm going to go niche. I'm going to go Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals. That's where I'm going to go. I can cover every emotion across an Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals in the music. So that's where I'm going to go. And that way I'll never get bored.
Could we convince him to do Lace the musical? That would be
Lace the musical. Maybe.
That would be a nice
thing. You never know.
That would be intriguing. That would be intriguing.
Yeah. Let's hope it doesn't tank like Cats the movie.
Yes, indeed. So I'm guessing that this is my awesome segue here. I'm guessing that one of the first pieces of advice is to a new CPO. I'll start with you, Aaron. Joining the organisation is not make sure you tell your staff what musical genre they want. So can you kick us off with just an initial kind of thing, hypothetical situation? You just met a CPO and they're just new in role, and they say, what sort of advice have you got for me? Let's pick one. We might do a bit of ad-libbing here, so I might get you to pick any more, but we'll kick off with one.
Well, look, and I think there's a lot going on for any CPO coming into that role for the first time in a new organization. And certainly, as you say, we talked to a lot of them who are going through that exact situation. I tend to think of it as a number of dimensions that have to think about. Maybe that's where we can dive into some of these, but clearly there's a whole raft of things that goes with the CPO role, which is around relationships. and really establishing those relationships. So you've got your CEO relationship and the rest of the exco. You've got a chair relationship to establish with the board and how that operates. You may have unions, and so, depending on which sector you're in, that you have to establish some form of relationship with early on, and probably a REMCO chair potentially. And there's also regulated environments for a lot of our clients as well. So there's a lot of relationship type stuff that goes on in that first 100 days. And I think when I talk to a lot of my clients who are going through that transition, they tend to be on the road for quite a lot of time, or on the phone a lot of the time for those first 100 days, doing exactly that, building those relationships and establishing and understanding what's going on. I think the other elements, and we'll dive into those in a little bit, but context, understanding your role in the organization, how the CEO and the board want you to perform and position, and how your team are executing and how you want to execute it are the other elements to sort of dive into. But for me, that sort of understanding your relationships and the web into which you've been dropped is probably my starting point for that discussion.
Gary?
Totally agree. And anything else we're going to describe really, I think, hangs off those relationships, right? You have to build those really solidly. But I think the other angle that Aaron has just alluded to is context and really understanding the business that you're operating in. Now, as a CPO, if you've come in fresh, you'll have presumably done your research. As a CPO stepping up, you'll already have some of that kind of context, but really understanding what are some of the business drivers that you're connecting to. So what is the ambition of your business? What's on its agenda for the next, I don't know what the tech scales look like now, but 2 to 3 years at least? Is it growth? Is it efficiency? Is it better customer service, customer intimacy? Is it getting more with less or the same? So really understanding what that business driver is, and therefore how you can then support that as you start to sort of build out your plan. But I think the other thing we advocate very heavily is getting to grips with those business metrics as well. So it's not just about understanding sort of what the business is doing, but what do the business metrics look like? What are the KPIs that are important? What should you be paying attention to? And what we strongly advocate is having that sort of breadth across those business metrics, not just honing in on the ones that seem relevant for HR. So it's getting a really good sort of broad scope about key business measures, where they're influenced, what influences them, what are the targets, how are we currently striving to achieve those targets, etc. So that broader business context, I think, is really key to get a handle on.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, David. I think the amount of CPOs I've talked to who use that 100 days to go and do a sort of walking in the shoes type exercise, get into the shop floor, get out to the distribution centers, get out to whatever it is part of the business, and really understand, how does this business make money? And what's the drivers? What are the people drivers that really help us excel and differentiate and bring customer excellence, and sort of get a hands-on sheep dip in some of those things, right?
I'm going to start with you. I've got another question, Debbie, because you were talking about building out the plan. I do want to come to that in a minute, but just from your experience and from the people that we've spoken to over the years, do you think the mindset of the CPOs have changed much? And I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. So when I first joined the organization back in 2019, pre-pandemic, we talked about HR on the offensive, and that's what this podcast is named after. And it was all about HR kind of stepping out of the shadows. It was about HR getting better at having that voice at the more senior C-suite. And we've just spent the last however many years, we've done countless pods talking about how post-pandemic that's kind of happened. HR has been pushed front and center a little bit more. But have you seen kind of like a mindset change from a CPO or a CHRO's perspective when it comes to maybe what their first 100 days might have looked like back then compared to now? Or from your experience, has that kind of always been what CPOs have thought about? It's just that they're amplified a little bit more.
My view is it's the latter. So I think it's always been there. I don't think it's new. I think we've talked for a long time, and this is, I think, where HR on the offensive kind of kicked off, about this blooming seat at the table, and HR being allowed to have a seat at the table versus HR, striving for and proving that they deserve that seat at the table and being welcomed at it. So I think it's always been there. I don't know that there's sort of a wild difference. I think in the main, the great CPOs that we talk to have that kind of business focus. They are commercially kind of driven. It's not just about HR for the sake of HR. I think what maybe has shifted slightly is the appetite from the business, from the broader business, to having an HR influence at a senior level, rather than just sort of, we talk about, now Aaron might talk about this a bit more, but we talk about different hats of the CPO in one of our blogs, and I think in a podcast as well. And we might very typically have seen a very heavy weighting on sort of the compliance hat, and yes, we'll deliver that, and we'll make sure our processes are right, and we'll pay everybody on time if we can. But actually the shift to being more influential in the C-suite, I think, is what's slightly different. Aaron, I don't know if you want to build on that at all.
No, I think it's a great point. I agree with you. I think it is the latter. I think it's an amplification of things. I think there are some new things that have come in over the last few years into the role, and reflecting, as Debbie was speaking there, that no two CPO roles, I think, are the same. And there's definitely different dimensions in there. It's much more transformational now as a role than it's ever been, for the whole raft of things we've talked about in other podcasts, right? From supply chain issues in the Suez Canal to Ukraine to everything else in between, right? There's lots going on. But workplace experience becoming a part of the role now that never used to be, that real sort of role on how you develop and design workforce experience, and ESG, regulatory compliance, and what does that mean for your business, and circular economy, if that's part of what you do as a business and your industry, and the role that HR and people have in that. And then quite often I'm seeing internal comms and that sort of marketing element start to feed in to CPOs as well. So I think it is the latter, but I think there are new things coming in. I think on this point around the 4 hats, it's a great one made, because I think it's a great way to sort of distill out where the emphasis is in that business for you as a CPO, and where you may want to change that emphasis as it's been historically to what you want it to be. Debbie mentioned one of the hats there around compliance champion. The other hats that we typically see, the service expert has always been there. And I think it has been a big part of the transformation type of work that we've done with clients over the time, has been really focused on how do you become the best at what you can deliver in your function over time. And that still remains. And I think AI and digitization plays into all of that. I think as a CPO coming in, you've got to have one eye on how far does your business want to push that and that transformation. The other 2 hats are quite interesting, I think, because I think they do talk to a lot of where businesses are right now in the current context. One is the transformation enabler type hat. And have you got the right leadership in place? Have you got the right behaviors and culture to drive transformation? Have you got the right skills in the business? And a big part of the CPO agenda at the moment is around that skills and talent for transformation. So I think you look at it with that hat in your first 100 days and really ask, what are the requirements of the business to succeed in transformation and get its competitive advantage, and your role in doing that. And then the last hat is the experience architect, we call it, and we talk about it there, which is, again, I think with the skills changes going on across most sectors and most businesses, how do you retain great talent? How do you drive great experiences? How do you live the promise of your organization? And I think quite a lot of the CPOs that we talk to have that squarely on their agenda with their leadership teams right now. What do we stand for? As we go through change, what are we going to stand for as we come out, and what's the experience look like on the other side?
Debbie?
The other factor experiences, of course, we're seeing more and more clients now trying to connect that employee experience with the customer experience that they deliver. So that kind of intimacy between the two becomes really key. And when we describe CPOs getting out in their first 100 days to meet people, but also to walk in the shoes of people on the shop floor, or doing the job in warehouses, or answering customer service calls, that's part of getting that sense of experience that is really key. But also, it's not just about the employee experience you're having, it's about the customer experience as well. So you're getting that sense and that kind of connection. I mean, we've worked with some people in retail environments, for example, where we want a really strong customer experience, but the employee experience they get is that they got to eat their dinner their lunch in a stock room, and the tech to provide brilliant service is constantly failing or not fast enough. So that impacts how I feel as an employee. So being able in those first 100 days to experience that for yourself as a CPO will really help to shape how do you deliver, but not just for the employee, but for the broader business. You're getting a really good sense of that context that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a new CPO, and I've decided to accost you 2 wonderful people for some advice and guidance. And firstly, you've started talking to me about the different type of headgear I've got to wear. Thank you very much for that. And I've already got my first week mapped out, which is I'm going to go across the branch network, or I'm going to go across the different offices and start to walk the floor. But I've got to start to think about, I guess, putting something down, a plan on paper and something like that. Debbie, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll get Aaron to jump in as well. We're in this this metaphorical pub. What's the kind of advice or guidance that we would give to people in terms of, okay, how do I map out this plan now?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, have you bought us both a drink? That's the
Of
first
course.
question. Okay, yeah, good. Okay,
Non-alcoholic for Aaron, of course.
And me. Good. So with drink in hand, what we would start to talk about is, I think, sort of as you described, well, you've spent that time being out and about and getting to know people. Aaron went in very heavy first with the relationships is critical. So I think, again, we have to build out on that and think about, what is that stakeholder map? Who are those key people and who do we need to influence and befriend? And what does that map look like for us? I think the other thing is to really then focus in on the context. So what is it the business has to achieve? What are the measures that we're going to look at as a collective business, not as an HR function? And how can I contribute to those and support and enable some of those? But there's also a couple of other things. So when we work with clients on developing out their people strategy, for example, we'll look at a couple of angles. So we'll look, first of all, at the top down. So what is the organization trying to achieve? What's its strategy? Where can the HR function, the people function, really kind of support and enable some of that? We also look bottom up. What's the experience we want to create for our employees? What are they currently experiencing? What's the gap? And therefore, what should we deliver against that? So I think those kind of two things are really key to start sort of building out what that plan might look like. And we would then sort of support a client with sort of building that people strategy. There's a couple of other tools we have in our kind of kit bag. There's a health check tool. So, we'll help clients to sort of get a really quick sense of the health across their function, looking at all elements of the function. So one of the internally focused things to look at is, how is my tech? What's my roadmap? What's it doing to deliver the experience that we think employees should have? What's our people manager capability? And is that enabling people to have the right experience at ground level? And then more we could do in some of that space. So we'll look at a whole range of things in a health check. So that might help, but also just generally those are the kind of things that we would encourage CPOs to consider. And then the other thing, we have our 10 traits tool. So our 10 traits is a framework really around what makes leading people functions. And it's driven out of the research that Emily Hughes leads for us on shared services. Every 2 years, she's producing a report, and that helps us to shape what are the really key core traits for an effective people function. And we can help clients with a very quick self-assessment tool to just give a kind of a quick kind of roadmap on how does it look? What are some of the areas for attention? And we can do that sort of either just with the CPO or with an HRLT, for example. So I think it's getting some of those very quick diagnostic tools could be really helpful. But again, it's the kind of top-down, bottom-up approach of what does the business need? What do the employees need? How does that help us? And what then should we be putting into a plan?
Perfect. And Aaron, just any kind of additional thoughts to build onto that in this wonderful virtual pub or metaphorical pub in which you've both got non-alcoholic drinks and I've got a gin and tonic? Anything to add to it?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think, that creation of a people plan with all of those inputs that we've just been through is critical in that sort of first 100 days to lay out what are you going to achieve and what do you want to work through. And the 10 traits is a great way of looking at it in a dimension. A couple of thoughts that come to mind. One is understanding what budget you have, how you can spend it and where does it come from. Right? How do you get more if you need it? And what do you need to do to secure it? I think sometimes that does get missed in those first 100 days and can then stall great plans. So I think, just understanding the mechanisms by which funding occurs inside your business to help you get what you're going to need, because undoubtedly you're probably going to want to do something that's transformational in some way around it. So I think that's definitely one of the areas to look into. I think there is an element also then clearly, as will most functional leaders of any function will look at, is what's the talent I have, and do I have the talent in the right location? So I think part of the conversation with CPO in the first 100 days is really understanding, do I have the right people to achieve the outcomes I'm trying to achieve as a business, and looking through those critical roles and weighing up familiarity with the business and business knowledge and alongside what is required by the business to transform for the future and making those calls. I think the other piece I would say, and we've touched on it a little bit with the sort of walking the floors type thing, I'm a great believer there's substitute in a people plan for voice of the customer. And I think if I was going into that CPO role and listening to some of our clients going into the CPO roles, finding a way to get a true voice of the customer out of the organization, so you know your decisions are informed by what is going to make a substantial change or impact in the organization. And quite often voice of the customer is missing in a lot of HR functions.
I went to a marketing conference a few weeks ago, and there was actually a HR director alongside the marketing director kind of presenting to us about just that, about their view that actually these two functions need to align a bit more, because it's really, really important for the HR team to have that voice of the customer and to understand that voice of the customer too. So really, really interesting stuff. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to just pose just one more question, and then maybe any kind of final thoughts from you guys for anything that we haven't picked up. So let's just say I'm really stretching the metaphor out now, so I apologise for this pub that we're in, and we've all decided to meet back up, and I'm just about to hit my 100 days mark, and I want to just reflect with you two wonderful people how it's gone, what's gone well, what's gone less well. What do you think my perfect utopia response to you guys should be for you to say, yep, you absolutely nailed it, 100 days, and now you could crack on and really make some waves for the next 100 or next year or next 5 years? Debbie, I'll start off with you if that's all right.
Ooh, I mean, where to begin? Aaron and I both looking at each other going, crikey.
Glad Debbie got that question first. That's what I'm thinking.
I mean, I think I'll steal Aaron's thunder again on relationships, right? So I think success looks like you have built a really good foundation for the relationships that are going to sort of see you through your tenure as CPO. And again, to Aaron's point, that's not just at the C-suite. The C-suite will be important, of course, but that is also across the business, across the sort of collective of employees and colleagues. And that, you know, what is understood is that you are a CPO who gets it because you've spent that time connecting with the business and what it does and how it services its customers or works with its suppliers. That's how you're perceived. And that's because you spent time building those relationships and having those experiences. So I have a bit stolen Aaron's thunder, I do apologise, but that I think is kind of the critical success factor, because as I said at the beginning, everything else will hang off that. You know, how you get to know the business, how you get to see the experience, all of that kind of stuff will hang off the relationships that you've built.
Okay, Aaron, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, unless you want to answer that one first.
Well, no, I was just going to add a little bit to it, because I'd agree completely with what Debbie had said. So I think, but my couple of other just angles, I think if you sat down in this pub 100 days in and said, I've got a plan, but I've taken no action, that's probably one of the things we'd go, well, you should probably try and take some actions in those 100 days. So don't feel like the 100 days is just planning. I think, you know, taking some immediate actions is not a bad thing to signal intent in an organization, especially if you haven't brought in a transformation type context. I think the other one is just understanding, what does your communication style look like in the context of the business you're entering? We all come with our own communication styles. I think one of the great things with working with CPOs over the years is they're very, very good at flexing those to the environments they're in. So just understanding how that plays out inside an organization.
Perfect. Do you know what? You've sort of semi-answered the additional sort of twist I was going to do, which was going to be a few years ago or many years ago, somebody from a previous business said, you can't really make a massive impact in an organization in the role that you're doing until you get to about a year in, because that's when you properly understand and get the business. And that's when you can start to having such a big impact. So I think you sort of touched on it there, Aaron, when you were talking about how don't fixate on this 100-day sort of mark and how much, for some people it'll be different, right?
Yeah. And in some organizations, you're going to need to move faster. If the context around that business driver is one around agility or real focus on productivity in the bottom line, there's a lot at the moment going on in the industries, across industries, that require significant involvement of people directors and CPOs to change the way the structure of a business has been for a long time. And you can't do that slowly. You have to move at pace for those sorts of things. Yeah, so I think don't get fixated on the 100. Think about the different paces for you and map it out.
Perfect. Debbie, go on.
I think that's connected into partly around relationship building, but really becoming the critical friend to the CEO and the exec, right? So we have talked about relationships a lot, but you need to build that trust with that senior level that actually you can be an active and influential part of their team. And I think some of what you're describing, Aaron, about the business is moving fast, you're going to need to move fast with it, is part of that you're not seen to just be saying, well, got to take my time to reflect on it. You will have to be responsive.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we are almost on time, so I'm going to give you both just a minute or so. If there's anything you wanted to, any kind of final thoughts that perhaps you might not have picked up on, or even just to re-emphasise in your 100 days, if you're only going to do one thing, do this. Aaron, I'll kick off with you. It's a bit of a free swim, to be honest with you, just as final thoughts.
I think we've covered a lot of things. Undoubtedly, and interesting talking to some CPOs recently, that there is an inundation of people, consultants, providers, etc., all wanting your attention. And I think what we found over the years is that is just a lot of, for the most part, noise, right? And therefore, you can't make decisions on a lot of those things until you've done this kind of activity we just talked about. So it's really important to see through the noise and get to these elements. I do always reflect on this role that the CPOs have, which is challenger around culture, and they hold the culture line for the CPO, so really understanding the culture. But ultimately they have two people to work into, the C-suite and then also the chair, and that relationship into the chair I think is the one that quite often gets not underplayed on the 100 days, but I think is less visible to the rest of the organization. But it is incredibly important for the CPO to really sort of establish what does the chair and the board actually want out of this application.
Perfect. Debbie?
2 for me, but very quick. 1, get to grips with the governance role within the organisation. So what's your CPO role on REMCOs, for example, and other governance bodies? And the second is build a network, and a network outside of the organisation. So, one of the other things we hear a lot is the CPO can be quite a lonely role, and we'd encourage people to sort of connect with other CPOs and share their war stories, but also their amazing successes.
Deborah, just as we wrap up, do you want to do a little shameless plug then? I can tell you do. Go on.
No, I mean, we run an invitation-only network. It's small and very safe, but I think the point is actually broader than that, which is finding those connections, those relationships outside of your organisation, so that you have a sounding board or a buddy or a connection that actually can help you to think through things and be your critical friend.
Perfect. Thank you very much to both of you guys for this whistle-stop tour into that first 100 days in the metaphorical pub. Aaron, great to have you on again.
Thank you, Chris. Enjoyed it.
Debbie,
off to listen to Andrew Lloyd.
Love it. Yeah, do it. And Debbie is going to wait for that call from Snow Patrol, aren't you?
I'm waiting for Snow Patrol, and I'll have a bag of cheese and onion when you next go to the bar. Thank you.
Lovely. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast. If you want to chat to Aaron or Debbie about any of the bits that we've talked about today, please feel free to reach out to them. You can connect with them on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find out all of the different types of CPO or CHRO related content that we put together, and general HR content as well, on the Lace Partners website, which is lacepartners.co.uk/insights. That's it from me, that's it from Debbie, and that's it from Aaron today. Thank you very much for listening in, and hopefully we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.